the broadcast. And we'll let people fill in here. All right, welcome everyone. Once we get around 100, I'll start our just introductory remarks here. Get settled in. All right, hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's coffee break. Before I introduce Melanie, just wanted to go over a few technical logistics, how to interact with everybody and how to use this platform. This is Zoom webinar, not Zoom meetings, so you don't have to worry about being heard or being seen. Your mics and your cameras are disabled by default, and we won't be unmuting them or anything like that, so you'll be fine in that regard. If you do want to chat with any of us, feel free to use the chat function there. Try to use that, any kind of commentary, technical issues, things of that nature, just side discussion in general. Chat's great for that. If you have a question for the presenters at any point, please use the Q&A function of the webinar dashboard. And that way it's a lot easier for us to keep track of the questions that have been asked and which ones have already been answered. So that's the short version of how to use it. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Melanie Gottlieb.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon and happy Friday. I am Melanie Gottlieb, the Deputy Director of AACRAO, and I'd like to welcome you to today's coffee break. It's a pleasure to be on the line with all of you today as we navigate the challenges presented by the COVID-19 crisis together. Joining me today is Sabi Benwazi, founder and CEO of Stellic, along with 3 institution-based panelists who I especially want to recognize for giving time to AACRAO while trying to navigate the impact of the coronavirus on their own campuses. I have John Papenchak, University Registrar at Carnegie Mellon, Scott Campbell, Assistant Vice President and University Registrar at the University of Chicago, and Casey Hayes, Assistant Registrar for Data Management and Reporting at Elon University. They're here today to give you updates on how they're adapting in the face of this crisis on their campuses. As always, we are hopeful that our technology will not fail us. This is a large Zoom call with a number of panelists, and we're all working at the mercy of our home Wi-Fis. We're not using the video function, and your mics are all muted so as to save on bandwidth. Next slide, please. As you navigate the challenges in this crisis, AACRAO is your association, and we're here to connect you with network colleagues to work through these challenges together in this time of unprecedented disruption in our profession. We've opened up the content vaults to the higher education community through our free 3-month membership option. If your membership has lapsed, or if there are others on your campus you want to have access to our resources to support you through this transition, we hope that you will consider this option. Next slide, please. You can find the guidance that AACRAO has created and posted around this crisis on the AACRAO guidance page. You can navigate to that at acrao.org/COVID guidance. The guidance has been crafted in typical AACRAO fashion, but also using a guidance team. The guidance team at AACRAO, it consists of Executive Director Mike Riley, myself, Associate Executive Directors Tom Green and Tina Deneen, and Director of Research Wendy Kilgore, all former campus-based professionals with years of experience. In addition, we have Director of Government Relations, William Gill. To build the guidance, we're using AACRAO established standards and re-envisioning them through the lens of the current COVID crisis, and then consulting with a variety of subject matter experts from our board of directors and amongst the membership. This may not be the typical way that AACRAO releases new guidance, but we are balancing our processes of member-developed projects with the need to address the current crisis with something immediate to support you as you navigate this new normal. We want to give you guidance that is thoughtful and well-developed, but also timely. Now, I'd like to turn the mic, next slide, please. On the AACRAO guidance pages, I also want to direct you to AACRAO's surveys. We have conducted 3 COVID impact practice snapshot surveys. The first was on grading and transcript practices and plans around commencement. The second was on undergraduate enrollment indicators, admissions practice, and fall course delivery. And the third has been on transfer credit evaluation, official transcript receipt and delivery, and fall term start date plans. Number 3 is just posted this week, and so you can find them all again on the AACRAO COVID guidance pages. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to Sabi.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you. And thank you for arranging this session. I think this will be a useful conversation for everyone on the call. So good afternoon, everyone. I think from our perspective, we are hoping that we can discuss and share some ideas around keeping students on track for graduation in a crisis situation. So hopefully through this session, we'll be able to learn a thing or few as we apply these policies on our own campuses. I would start by saying the past few weeks, to say the least, have been unprecedented. And just to kind of like illustrate that point, this morning I was looking at like Google Trends, and you can actually see like since Google has started like arranging the data, it truly has been unprecedented to see like how often people are thinking about like these unusual times. And what we are hoping to do today is 2 things. First, I think everyone is feeling a little overwhelmed for the past few weeks, and especially the students, I think, are feeling overwhelmed about what their future looks like, which is what our focus would be for today. But I also want to make sure, and one thing that we have realized ourselves, the role of a registrar is so important in making students feel less overwhelmed, feeling more, in control where things are going. And so first of all, I just want to appreciate all the registrars who have done so much work and shown care and compassion, for the students, from pass-fail policies to changing the timelines. It really has been very heartwarming to see what higher education has tried to do for students and making sure the students not feel as overwhelmed as they are feeling right now. In today's conversation, I want to just share a few strategies and ideas that we have learned from our panelists, and also make sure that we can see the light at the end of this tunnel, have some hope and positive journey as we think about the impact of this whole situation on the long term. So, and we are very fortunate to have the right panelists on board, a diverse set. We have John Papinchak, as Melanie mentioned. John has like more than 36 years of experience actually from a registrar's perspective from Carnegie Mellon. And as a CMU graduate, I can say that he absolutely cares about students. So it's great to have John on the panel. We have Scott. He's an assistant vice president and university registrar at the University of Chicago. He has been in the registrar space for more than 30 years and for the last 7 years at the University of Chicago. And then we have Casey Hayes as working from a registrar office as an assistant registrar for data management and reporting at Elon University, where he has been there for the last 7 years. So it's great to have you all here. I'll start with John with the big question today. How has COVID-19 impacted students' ability to graduate? And what is your office doing about that?
Thanks, Abhi. I think, for a lot of us, this has been a huge question. And, I think the goal really is for most schools is hopefully we're going to be able to say it has not. But in reality, I think we all have to realize that as we've gone to remote instruction, there are some courses that can't be taught digitally or remotely. And so how do we adjust our requirements to make sure that those students who needed those last few credits or those last few units, we teach on a Carnegie unit basis to meet those graduation requirements. What are we doing academically to make sure that things are being handled and being adjusted appropriately so that, again, it doesn't negatively impact our students. From the registrar's perspective, a lot of that has been providing lots and lots of information to, academic leadership and decision makers so that we can really help them with making the right decisions in the right time frame. And I think that's what I've spent most of my time in the last month doing, as well as my staff, and really responding to those questions, being able to help share the information, as well as making sure that we're making good decisions to help best support our students, particularly the class of 2020, because again, they're really feeling a lot of the burden of the COVID-19 impact.
Absolutely. So you mentioned about like multiple stakeholders, and one thing unique I think about Carnegie Mellon is being a global campus, like with more than 10 locations across the world, from Africa to Australia to Asia, and then in Europe. Have you seen any, like, how was it managing these policies and these ideas across these campuses?
Well, I think a lot of the impacts really came from our senior leadership, and our provost really, at the time when everything started to happen in early March, started assembling a provost leadership group. He created a provost committee on academic matters that a number of us were involved with, looking at what are going to be all the impacts, what are going to be the things that we are going to have to do as it relates to graduation requirements, remote instruction, grading, diplomas, you name it, all the things that impact. And the other part of that was getting our Dean's Council together almost immediately and on an every other day basis. They were meeting to go over the things that were impacting and allowing everyone to share what were those barriers or challenges from the different teaching locations and campuses. And because having all the deans on the same call, that made it very easy for us to kind of build from the commonalities and work with some of the exception handling that may have been different across different locations. For example, our Doha campus went remote instruction about a week before Pittsburgh did, as well as our Silicon Valley campus also went to remote because they were hit much harder, much earlier. And so we were able to, dare I say, use them as a little bit of a test case as we started to roll out to other campuses and locations and work through some of the challenges as we had experiences in different areas. Absolutely.
And you're right, like the timeline and the timing of this matters a lot, which brings me to the next piece from Scott. Scott, University of Chicago is in a quarter system. How has this whole crisis impacted what are the differences really with the quarter system versus the semester system when it comes to like making changes to timeline and academic policies?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Sabi. This has been extremely challenging for us being on the quarter system, because as the impact really hit Chicago, we were just starting our final exams for the winter quarter. We didn't complete the full week of final exams. We actually started sending students home on Wednesday evening of that week, and really went to more of a remote exam for the final 2 days. We ended up delaying our grade due dates by 2 weeks in order to give the instructors and the students the ability to have some more time just in case it was needed throughout this experience. But not only just closing up the winter quarter, starting the spring quarter was very challenging as well. University of Chicago is very much of a traditional university and very brick and mortar, and we had absolutely no online presence at all at the institution when it comes to instruction. So just ramping up and getting us into a position where we could deliver remote teaching and remote instruction was quite challenging, but I really see the registrar's role, or my role during this whole time, was really to support folks through our systems, through data and analysis, through communications, keeping those communications lines open with the provost, with the deans, with IT, and just bringing a whole level of collaboration together in order to make it possible to deliver what we did on time.
Absolutely. And so can you talk a little bit about the grading policy adjustments that you guys have accommodated here?
Sure. And so our grading policy is unique, as with many things at the University of Chicago. And we have always allowed pass-fail grading, but that grading policy was really a decision between the instructor and the student. Mm-hmm. So an instructor could always give a pass grade along with any quality grade that the student may have earned. So as we looked at this and trying to get a decision on what we were going to do, especially at the undergraduate level, we did make a decision that our general education and core requirements would not be allowed to have a pass-fail grading policy, but the free electives and the major requirements could. So it's kind of a mismatch, and we are struggling with our systems still, even with with that mismatch, to try to make sure that we are carefully calculating all the students' GPAs correctly, and that we are tracking it appropriately in our degree audit systems.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Casey, moving on to your perspective, I know Elon is huge on experiential learning and study abroad programs. How, with that kind of focus on these things, like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how this crisis has impacted students' ability to graduate on time.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been at the forefront of a lot of conversations right now, especially with study abroad, with fall being one of the biggest times that students study abroad. And it's really uncertain if they're going to be able to study abroad in the fall. So we've had to build contingencies around that we actually reached out to all of those students to use our registration system and kind of set up a shopping cart of the courses that they would take if they are on campus, because we have a large group of students that would be studying abroad that if they're not going to be, they're going to have to be on campus in sections that otherwise are pretty highly utilized. So by leveraging those kinds of technologies and reports to see where the demand would be if those students would be on campus, we've already started opening up additional sections as a contingency in the event that would happen. So we really had to think creatively about how we can accommodate a large influx of students that we weren't preparing to have on campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, like having multiple routes or backup plans is extremely important, in these times. So absolutely. So thank you guys for sharing your, introductory thoughts on this. I would like to also ask our audience what they feel about it. So let's pull up the first poll. How do you guys think that this has impacted students' ability to graduate? Not just for current students, but also for students who will be graduating a year or 2 years from now. And how important do you think is the role of registrar in this crisis?
All right, we'll close that voting in just about 10 seconds here. So be.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
All righty, share the results right now.
Mm-hmm. Great. And honestly, like, as I look at this poll and see like somewhat to be the majority consensus, I truly think that's because of the second answer, where the role of a registrar is so important and critical in order for that to happen. So going back to my point of like, really appreciating the registrar's role and the academic leadership role for making that, happen. Moving on, I think, Scott, from your perspective, as you think about communication with the students, having policies is one thing. Sharing those policies with the students is obviously a whole different factor here. How is it communicated to the students? Is it just a web page, or are you guys sending emails? And especially, are there platforms and systems in place which are reflecting these policies for students to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're doing various things here. We do send an email, but as everyone on the call I'm sure knows, students don't really read email that much anymore. So we have built 3 different websites to really capture all of our different policy changes that we have made. One is our Teaching Remotely website. Another is Learning Remotely. And then finally, we have a Spring 2020 website, which really just kind of brings everything together. We also do a lot with social media, and a lot of this is really coming from our larger university communications office as opposed to anything directly coming from the registrar's office. And we do send all of the parents of our undergraduate students all of our communications as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. John, from your perspective, how have you seen the communication piece, which is so critical in this remote environment? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very similar to Chicago's efforts. We're doing a lot of the same types of things, and I'm sure lots of others are doing that as well. We've also created a number of FAQs that, again, kind of our central marketing team are overseeing, but lots of collaborators, lots of contributors as things have come up, particularly as it relates to the to policy changes on things that need to be communicated or shared. As Scott mentioned, we're also sharing things with parents because obviously they need to be in the know as we're going through these uncertain times. And then also trying to, when we can, have phone conversations with folks, particularly as they ask lots of questions and having the staff available. I know our Office of International Education has also been doing a number of Zoom calls and almost like these webinars for students and our international students and our students for internships and what does this mean for them. And we're kind of taking a page out of some of the conference and the remote teaching books and trying to provide information to students in that same way.
Mm-hmm. Are these changes will be reflected in the SIS, degree audit, other systems that you would be using?
I think for, as it relates to the policies, certainly, and we're making some short-term changes. We're making some long-term changes as things are going to be adjusted. We're using our student portal to put up notes and tips that will reflect some of these changes. For example, we changed our grading policy. We are putting a note on the back of our transcript and on our transcript page that basically says, what we've done for this semester and the fact that we've given students the ability to elect pass, no pass grades in lieu of letter grades. And so, we want to basically be able to communicate that out to our employers and advisors as well as other third parties. And so not so much really in the student system, but more in the degree audit application so that students can use that as they start to make future plans for summer courses and fall courses and the like.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Scott, do you want to add something to that in terms of communication piece?
Yeah, and I would agree with John. Really, we will be putting a lot of this policy in our systems, and also, the use of the portal is just really been a great resource too, because as students have to log in to do any of their business transactions with the university, we were able to just do a lot of pop-up notifications and keeping students on track that way.
Great. Casey, so I know Elon uses their SIS-driven degree audit system around that. With the native SIS system, how have you guys accommodated all these policies and changes so that students see an accurate picture of their progress?
Yeah, really the biggest one that we've had to focus on is a pass-fail policy, a special policy that we've created that differs from the normal one. Traditionally, our students can't use a passing grade to satisfy a degree requirement. And we rely very heavily on our degree audit. And so if we're allowing all of these students to take these classes as pass-fail now, that was a big concern for how we would address that degree audit issue, that none of those courses would be satisfying the degree requirement. So to address that, we created a special a special pass-fail grade called Pass Special that we've been able to go into the system to say this grade is acceptable to satisfy a degree requirement. And that way, these students can have the option to take it as pass-fail. If so, it's going to leave them on track to graduate. And we've also been leveraging a lot of communication through email and automated processes to let the student know the moment that they fall out of compliance in their degree audit as well. So using those kinds of systems, we're very confident that our students and our seniors especially are staying on track to graduate. And much like Scott and John have said, the communication with the students has been so critical. We have really thought creatively about how to open up a lot of new avenues of communication to let them know that we are thinking about them, we're here for them, we can answer any questions for them. We have not just answering phones remotely, but we're also doing these kinds of Zoom meetings and making ourselves available in whatever way we can, just to let them know that they can stay on track. We're here to help and answer any questions that might come up. We have our website similarly has been modified. It seems like every office now has a COVID-19 section of how this impacts our office and you. And the institution overall has a banner to just let them know about the state of the coronavirus at Elon and its impacts.
And Sabi, I would just add too, the use of the degree audit for the exceptions and waivers is going to be critical for us to clear our students to graduate this spring, largely because we will be given a lot of exceptions for coursework.
That's actually a very, very important point, because I think like for a lot of other schools that we work with, there is still like some element of paper-based, petitioning for graduation, exceptions, things like that. Can you share more on that? Like, did U Chicago had those policies or like paper-based processes? And if they do, how did they transition in such a short period of time?
Sure. And, and largely most of our systems are automated and online, but we still do have so many different exceptions, especially around Bachelor of Arts papers that students can write in lieu of taking coursework, reading and research courses, other types of courses like that, that do require or have required in the past a lot of signatures around the university between the faculty member, perhaps even the director of undergraduate studies, the dean. And so we have been able to automate a lot of this just basically through PDF fillable forms and having some type of flow that we could track through email. Obviously, we would want to do something much larger than that long term, and we have wanted to do it, but this kind of put us in a position where we had to react and we had to do something and get everyone on board.
Absolutely. John, from your perspective, as we think about these exceptions and these communications that needs to be made with the student, I'm assuming at the forefront of this, along with the registrar's office, is also the advisors. So can you share about how advising office or advisors are playing the role in keeping students feel more comfortable?
Sure. So one of the things that we did was we gathered a number of our advisors into a number of Zoom calls. We were meeting weekly for a while now. I think we're meeting every other week, and having them being able to get updates from a lot of the leadership and from our vice provost for education, as well as myself and others that were involved in, things that were happening in the student success unit, as well as what was happening kind of on the grading policy and answering lots and lots of questions that they had as how things were going to be impacted, how the data was going to be used, how it was going to be shared, how it was going to be available to them, as well as how it was going to be translated in our degree system so that they knew how to advise students going forward, whether it was the students who are graduating this semester and how it was going to meet those requirements versus what were going to be the things that, in handling, prerequisites, for example, or co-requisites for the fall courses. And, should they be doing prerequisite waivers, which is one of the things that we'll be looking into this summer. But for most of our students, we check prerequisites to make sure that they've passed them. But during the registration time, they can register for courses, assuming that they're going to pass the prerequisite. And then we go back and double check that over the summer. So I think those are some of the things that we're going to be continuing to work with our advisors on, as well as for some of the courses that we did have to cancel some second half of the semester mini lab courses because they were, in the machine shop or, in some of the maker spaces, and we didn't feel comfortable in trying to move them to remote delivery right away. So some of those got canceled, and we worked with advisors to try to help get students into other second half mini courses that they could do to fulfill those requirements. And there was a little bit of some leniency, whereas if they needed maybe a technical course and they took a second half mini course that maybe wasn't quite as technical, we were able to kind of make some of those exceptions in good conscience through that group to allow particularly those graduating students to meet those requirements and have some of those waivers within the degree audit system to allow the students to be on track for graduation.
Yeah, and from what I recall, like CMU follows like faculty advising model where I'm assuming communication would be a whole different complex than a central office. So I think, Scott, from your perspective with with an advising center that helps all their undergraduates, how have you guys communicated and collaborated with the advising office?
Yeah, so we do have one college where all undergraduate students are housed. And so there's a central advising office there of about 35 advisors. My office works very closely with them and on a regular basis. With our degree audit, for example, the technical pieces and the maintenance of the degree audit is managed by my office, the registrar's office, while the policy, of course, comes out of the college dean's office. So that close collaboration, of course, is critical and very important. My folks who work on the degree audit and the college meet, I think, several times a week, just trying to make any type of updates that are needed from a policy perspective, or even from a training perspective on processing transactions.
Yeah, and Casey, Elon has this registration, I think, hold based on advising sessions. How have you guys thought about that in the midst of this?
Yeah, so traditionally, Elon does require that all students be cleared by their advisor to be able to register. And, with all the chaos going on right now, and as has been mentioned, students aren't always checking their email. It was a concern that a student could get to their registration time, which we just started registration this week. So we're seeing this right now that we didn't want a student to get to their registration time and find that they had not been cleared yet by their advisor to be able to register. So to have one less hurdle in all of this, we decided that we were going to give a blanket approval to everybody that had not yet been cleared to register, and send out additional communication to the student and the advisor saying that it's still paramount that you get advisement to make sure you're staying on track for graduation, but that you do have this clearance so you can go ahead and register. And that's been well received, that those kinds of proactive steps to remove any of those potential hurdles has been really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's super critical for advisors to be communicating. Let's open it up for the second poll. I want to hear from the audience. how they feel the importance of advisor is, in ensuring that students stay on track. Again, not just the students graduating for this semester, but students will be graduating later.
I'll leave it open for another 10 seconds or so. All right, sharing the results.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, it's certain, right? I mean, we are. This is an AACRAO, webinar and session, and it's great to see, like, the registrar community do feel the importance of advisors and working closely with them during this time. So I think the next topic is also very important, and that's around equity. I mean, students are not in dorms, or I mean, New York Times has a great article about that, where two students who were having same access to technology while they were on campus. Now they could be anywhere, any part of the country. So how do we make sure that all students have access or have equity as they think about their own progress, towards their academic journey? So John, let's start with you. Like, can you share some of the things that Carnegie Mellon has done to ensure equity?
Sure, that was a challenge definitely for us at the beginning when we were asking students. This all happened while our students were on spring break. Some students were still on campus, some were obviously home, others were out in different locations. But as we were asking them to not return if possible, or to head home, we did have a number of students that could not necessarily get from campus. And so one of the first things that we did was we told students that if staying on campus was the safest thing for them to do, that we would allow them to stay on campus for the remainder of the semester, because some students just couldn't make it home to their international location, or to some of the areas of the country that were hotspots. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to do that. We still have about 400 some students who are still in our residence halls. We have consolidated them into a couple residence halls so that we're keeping them, separately located, practicing social distancing, but yet still in the same building, so that we can maintain safety and security for them. But we've also had students who, from an access issue, that were in some areas where they did not have good internet, or they did not have a laptop. So we were able, and we're fortunate that we have some resources to be able to do this, get laptops to students. We mailed a number of laptops across the country. We also provided internet access to a number of students that didn't have it. And basically set them up with the ability to, add on to their plan if they needed it boosted, depending upon where they were in the country, to help support the bandwidth that they had. But again, we're fortunate with that ability. We have had, and we've heard stories where students have, sat in parking lots of some of the big box stores so that they can get, free internet, and we certainly help them with providing additional internet access in those situations. And we had one student that was in a homeless situation in New York, that we got him a laptop and an internet card so that he could basically take advantage of everything that we needed him to be doing during the rest of the spring semester. But again, we're fortunate enough that we had those resources to be able to do that. We know not every institution has that.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's so critical. Scott, would love to hear your thoughts on that. What is University of Chicago doing when it comes to equity?
It's very similar to what John has just described. you know, we've had such a heavy push over the past 5 or 6 years for, you know, to really recruit and retain first generation and low income students. And so making sure that we keep after them and give them anything that they necessarily need from an institutional funding perspective. Within the first few days of us closing down campus, we built a student emergency grant process so that students could apply, and within 12 to 24 hours, they had an answer. And those grants are just that, they're grants, they're not loans, and they could be anywhere between $500 so that they could buy a plane ticket to get home, or a few $1,000s just to kind of, you know, do whatever was needed for in their particular case. So, and that includes everything from, you know, technology needs to food insecurities. So again, I feel very fortunate that my institution is able to do that, and obviously not everyone's can.
Right, right. Yes, absolutely. Casey, from your perspective, can you share more about like some strategies for equity that Elon is taking?
It's pretty much in line with what John and Scott have said. I think one of the first things that I noticed was that Elon was keeping its doors open for any student that needed to stay on campus, while they were encouraging students to go home that were able to. But in no way were they kicking anybody out. We kept our dining halls open. We kept our library open. Computer labs are still open. All of those with new social distancing policies and operations, but in general, it's pretty similar.
Yeah, I want to go back to Scott's mention about like grants, and that makes me think about like undergraduates versus graduate students, and how like, you know, some of those efforts might change. I mean, I think they have grants and scholarship that are determined by the time they take to graduate. Are there any, like, you know, decisions that have been made to accommodate that?
It's really on a case-by-case basis, and there wasn't really like any type of policy that we were trying to come through. You know, it was really just looking at the students' individual needs, whether they be an undergraduate or graduate.
Yeah, and pretty much the same here. We did the same thing. Our undergraduate financial aid policies are all centralized, and our undergraduate resources are all centralized. So we had a little bit greater flexibility. But for our graduate students, one of the things is a number of our colleges did create similar funds, as Casey also mentioned, where they were trying to get money to students to help them with the different things that they had challenges with. We've kept our food pantry open as well in order to make sure that, you know, students with food sensitivities are able to take advantage of that. The other thing that I would also mention is that we encourage faculty members, being sensitive to students in different time zones, to record a number of their lectures and materials so that students that had a difficult time, you know, either getting up early or staying up late for some of the classes were able to attend to the materials kind of asynchronously rather than having it always be live.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just mention in these very challenging economic times ahead of us, we did have a $1 million anonymous donation to help students in need during this time.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, as I'm, by the way, hearing all these responses throughout this conversation, it just makes me feel like somehow like we have become like superhumans in the way we are getting things done and making decision making. It's just really impressive to see how fast things are moving and decision making is happening. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but before we do, I do want to open the third poll and ask like the themes we have discussed today on the call. How are other institutions really making changes in each of these themes in order to accommodate student stress? So let's open it up for another like a minute or so, and then we'll move on to the next and the last session.
Yeah, sure thing. And just for everyone's information, this is multiple choice, so you can select as many options as is applicable for you. close it out in about 10 seconds here. All right, and sharing the results.
Okay. I will, let's go across the table, and then I would love to hear your thoughts on how you think about the results. But also, I want to wrap up with on a on a light at the end of the tunnel. So we can start with you, John. I mean, as we have gone through these last 2 months or so, do you believe are there any long-term effects on higher education, especially around student experience? How do you think these the efforts we have put will have a long-term effect on higher education?
Sure, I think there's definitely going to be some long-term downstream effects. I mean, I think one of them certainly in the way we deliver courses. Before all of this happened, everyone said, "Oh, we can never deliver most of our courses through distance or remote education." I think a lot of folks are finding that, hey, it's definitely doable, but it certainly requires a number of additional resources. We, in particular, had 2 online programs at our master's level, and one of them is a hybrid program where they go to a classroom in another location and attend through distance technology. They found that they couldn't do that, so that therefore they had to kind of think about ways to attend to that materials differently. The other program was truly distance, and students could attend it, lectures and classes as they liked. They were able to, be very flexible, and we were able to learn from them on some of the success stories that they've gone through and some of the trial and errors, lessons learned. And that's helped us a lot with thinking about how we're delivering things remotely. But I think it also brings into, how do I want to say this, light that there are a number of things that we do, kind of bricks and mortar, that can't be done through distance. Yeah, we've made some accommodations this semester, but we're looking at fall planning and going, it's going to be really tough to provide a music degree, completely remotely. You really need the hands-on practice with the master instructors to be able to do this in the right fashion. And so, what are we going to be able to do to help accommodate that? So I think those are some of the things that we're going to learn, and I think it's going to help us with certainly working with a lot of our students and families on, how do we improve the delivery of our education, and how do we get faculty members to think a little bit differently from just the sage on the stage that a lot of us have been talking about, should be flipped, and how do we flip the classroom to help instruction become much more dynamic and interactive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yes, I think once we start thinking about how some of these programs can be taught online, it certainly opens up a whole different possibilities of how many other students who can take it. Scott, from your perspective, what do you think are the long-term effects of of this on higher education, especially from students' experience perspective?
From a student experience perspective, I would echo everything that John says. Really as it relates to academics and instruction, I think we're going to see great changes there. But also, if you look at it just from a student affairs perspective of what this looks like from these traditional institutions who have these very robust residence life in huge dorm rooms and students living on top of each other and our dining facilities and all the social aspects of a traditional undergraduate degree are going to change immensely, both I think in the short term and in the long term.
Mm-hmm. And do you think these changes will be just changes, or do you think they'll be positive changes for students?
I think I think you can look at it both ways. I think again, none of us know what's on the other side of this, but I definitely think that they're going to be long-term changes from a society perspective. And I think it's going to take a lot of adjustment, not just from us in higher education, but for all things that we do. So I think I'm trying to be very positive about it and very optimistic about it. But from a traditional student affairs perspective, I think it's going to take some adjustment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Casey, what are your thoughts for students who would be joining Elon?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I think in the end, I don't think there is a normal anymore. Things will hopefully return back to some ways that they used to be, but I think if anything, we've learned from this, and we've seen that other than the basics, that there's going to be more online flexibility, more hybrid classes, increased usage from the LMS, and how Elon is. For our labs, we're shipping science kits so that students can still participate in a lab remotely. But I think that there's going to be pretty far-reaching implications of this whole thing. That that there's probably going to be shifts in program enrollment by discipline. I think something like this will we'll have students really take a look at what they want to study in. Like maybe pre-med is going to see a spike. And then at Elon, I'm sure that we're going to see a requirement for all staff and faculty to have established contingency plans.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be prepared for anything like this. And so we can be better prepared in the future if anything happens again. And institutional policies, I'm sure will change. Institutions will probably become more lenient with transfer credit policies and residency requirements. And touching back on the pass-fail that we see a lot of institutions having, Elon is going to accept a pass grade for this, where normally we wouldn't accept a pass-fail for transfer. Now we're going to, because we understand that other institutions are implementing a similar policy. So we want to be cognizant of that and be open to receiving that credit and allowing that student a bit more flexibility in how they can transfer credit back to Elon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's, I guess, like one last question I have for you, and then we can open up for Q&A, and we'll go backwards. So Casey, if you have to like summarize your lessons or things that you have learned over the last 4 to 6 weeks, what would you have to share?
I can't remember if it was Scott or John or both mentioned it before. It's amazing how I think this is a testament to how necessity is the mother of invention. How when we are forced to, when it's required, it's amazing what things we can accomplish, and how things that previously were said to be impossible, or we can't do it, or it's not the institution's goal, have gone and almost overnight suddenly been implemented. So it's really interesting the way that we've seen collaborative tools be used. Things like Microsoft Teams at Elon has seen a huge uptick. Mm-hmm. And how efficiently that has allowed the registrar's office to stay connected to one another, to keep track on project management, on tasks, on just keeping those lines of communication open up to each other. Those kinds of things are extremely important, and we have been working very hard to ensure that everybody has access to those, everybody knows how to use them, so that we can still be efficient workers and also still feel satisfied in our work. And I think that it's what I've learned on a personal level is how important it is to just be mindful in all this. That how important it is to be able to remember to laugh at things and celebrate small victories. And I've reached out to other staff to just check in on how they're doing and make sure that everybody's doing okay in all this. And I was touched that one of our colleagues offered, if we needed any office supplies while working from home, she offered to pick them up and deliver them to our house for us. So little acts like that have really been touching and have gone a long way.
Absolutely. Scott, what are your lessons?
Yeah, I think everything that Casey said, and wow, Casey, that's very impressive. But taking care of your team, making sure that they are that they're doing okay is just very, very important. And to really, I think one of the things that I have learned through this whole thing is not to internalize every small little detail that's happening, and thinking about the big picture here and what we're all trying to accomplish. I think all institutions, regardless of where you sit, are going to go through a very difficult financial crisis over the next several years, and we will get through it, and we will come out better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all, I'm very hopeful. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, great points. Thank you both, Casey and Scott. I think, some of the things that, as registrars, we all tend to be contingency planners. And, I think lots of us have plan Bs and Cs and Ds. It certainly has been something that our institution and others have been thinking a lot more about contingency planning, which has been a good thing. So I think it raises, risk assessment, risk, disaster recovery, business continuity planning to a new level, which is always good across, the institution. And hopefully as registrars, you can insert yourself into there, because we all do that a lot, and we're all involved in a lot of these things. And so the other part of this, I think, is it's raising the registrar boat, as it were, because we're finding as a silver lining here that lots and lots of folks across campus didn't realize that the registrar staff was involved in as many things as we are involved. And so I think it's created a new awareness and respect for the office. The registrar is not dead quite yet. And I think, in a lot of ways, that's been a positive for us. And I think it will definitely continue to have some lasting effects. And definitely the collaboration and flexibility across our institution has been awesome. I have collaborated with more and more offices than have ever in a long, long time. And the fact that everyone is showing, that greater sensitivity and flexibility. And I really want to echo the comments that both of my colleagues made about checking in with people. We have lots of folks that are home alone, right? And making sure that they're okay, goes a long way to help tying into just that. I think Casey said mindfulness and just being a good human. The lasting part of this, I think, is going to show all of us is that face-to-face contact that we have is so critical for us as social animals. And while I think it's going to affect, the attitude towards brick and mortar higher education, I think it's also going to show everyone that just exactly why we need brick and mortar education, because it's not just about the learning, it's also about the social experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think the collaboration piece is so interesting to see. And I absolutely, not just thank you guys to attend this, panel, but also for all the effort that all of the three institutions have done for students. So thank you so much for, for doing that. I would briefly just say from our perspective, as a technology vendor, we are trying our best and playing a small part to also participate and do whatever we can from technology perspective to help registrars and to help, everyone in that regard. I can tell you the past 3-4 weeks, our engineers have worked a lot to build functionalities that were not as important as suddenly they have become in the last 3 to 4 weeks. So I think, for me, the takeaway absolutely would be collaboration across all these different departments, and areas. So thank you, everyone. I just want to ask one question from the list of questions, which I think could be interesting. Maybe one of you can answer. So the question from Eleanor is, how are you engaging students in your planning efforts for fall?
So that's I can jump in a little bit. I think that's a great question. At this point right now, it's a lot of I don't knows. In the state of Pennsylvania, we are still prohibited from operating, in a lot of ways. And we have canceled or moved our summer sessions to remote only through August 1st. I think we're going to be in a wait and see position as we see how things are going to adapt. right now we're hoping for the best and planning for the worst. And so we've been communicating to our students. Registration opens next week. We want them to register according to their plans. But I think, as Casey also mentioned, for our students that were thinking about study abroad, we want them registering for fall courses so we can make sure that they have a schedule and have courses to attend in case their study abroad opportunity doesn't pan out. We're definitely using students in trying to understand where they are in their time zones. We did a time zone survey so that we can try to adapt courses accordingly. And we're continuing to view courses as synchronous delivery and asynchronous delivery so that we can try to meet all of our students' needs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. We are the same way, Sabi. And so this is one area that I'm glad that we're a quarter school, because our autumn quarter doesn't begin until October 1st. So that buys us another month from most of you don't have. So lots of discussions between now and then.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, so just one more thing, and then I'll hand it over to Melanie. So from our side, we are doing our part, what we can, to help institutions around, like, degree planning and helping student experience. So if any institution is interested in having a plan for technology-driven advising by fall, we are doing a session about that next Thursday, 2 p.m. You can register through bit.ly/Stellic-webinar. And we'd be happy to participate in whatever contribution we can make in making this a little bit easier for students and for the registrar's office. With that, Melanie, back to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sabi, and thank you to our institutional presenters. That was an incredibly well facilitated discussion, and I really appreciate everyone's insights and Sabi's insightful questions into the struggles of records offices today. I'm continually impressed by the amount of flexibility and by the dedication that our institutions are employing in order to serve their students in this really challenging time. So thank you all. So, oh, it looks like there's a poll that has popped up. I don't know if anyone else can see that. Well, I'm just going to continue, and I just want to say that for those of you who need more specific and tailored advice and guidance, you can certainly reach out to AACRAO Consulting. We have marshaled experience and have retooled to offer heavily discounted express counseling sessions, consulting sessions, priced at less than $1,000 in order to support unique institutional challenges. If you have questions or you have needs for just some outside advice or guidance to work through a specific problem on your campus, email consulting@acrao.org for more information. Next slide. Lastly, I want to say save the date for upcoming coffee breaks. On Wednesday, April 22nd at 2 p.m., we'll be working with graduate and professional school updates. Some very specific focus will be on medical and law schools, but we will also be more broadly addressing some of the updates and challenges around graduate and professional schools. And on Friday, April 24th, we will be working with our close partner Parchment, Coffee Break with Parchment, and they will be exploring the ways in which records and registration professionals can spin up document delivery and transcript delivery as a means of business continuity in these challenging times. So for more information on our coffee breaks and other guidance, please visit acrao.org/COVID guidance. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us today.
Some interesting results there. We'll close it out, and we'll try to get the unaddressed questions in some kind of written resource in the week or two to come. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe.